let's get it started. I mean, for this first chat, I really wanted to invite you because we can see that anti-aging is really a growing topic. It's something that comes up more and more, and we start seeing that there's really a hype around the field. I think especially like in the US and Silicon Valley. I mean, if you just look at like companies like Unity, that raised like 116 million round like in October 2016 from both life science investors like Arch, Fidelity, and also from like Jeff Bezos and some other like mainstream investors. And they really want to develop like Senescent Cell Clearance Development. It's really based on a biological discovery. And so you have that hype, which seems to be more like based on treating the symptoms of the disease and understanding how the biology works behind it instead of treating the consequence once it's too late, like cancer or Alzheimer's. But I guess the challenge here is that I mean, the anti-aging concept is kind of very easy to grasp, but also quite hard to define. So how would you really define it from a biotech point of view?
Okay, so yeah, let's start there, and then I'd love to just comment briefly on like the types of investors that are getting involved. Sure. So on aging itself, I agree completely. It's a very easy concept for people to understand, like, oh, we're living longer and living healthier. But when you define it, it can be almost anything, right? If we invented a pill that cured cancer, we would be living longer because we cured cancer. So are all oncology drugs anti-aging pills? Clearly, they're not, right? That's not what we mean when we talk about aging. To me, it's less about the indication that you're going for or the type of clinical trial that you're making. And anti-aging is really defined by the basic biology that your medicine is going after. And so Maria Blasco and some colleagues, who's a scientist that studies telomeres in Spain, made a really, really good review in Cell a few years back called The Hallmarks of Aging. And it defines like the 9 different basic biological mechanisms that start to go wrong as we age. And so to me, the kind of circumscribed definition of what's in aging biology is about what's affecting the basic mechanisms enumerated there that go wrong with our bodies naturally as we age. And that can be in terms of cancer, for example, like our DNA is getting mutated and acquires mutations over time, which can eventually lead to cancer. So a drug that could affect DNA mutation rates and the DNA repair mechanisms, that could be called an anti-aging drug, but something that's targeting a tyrosine kinase that prevents cancers that have already established themselves from growing as much is clearly not an anti-aging drug, even though both of them might be going for the same cancers.
And how advanced is the biological understanding on these like 9?
Yeah, I would say that within the last 5 years, our understanding has gone from theory and hypothesis driven to really coalescing a strong knowledge base, a strong data driven knowledge base. And like these are definitely the things that are the major causes of why we get older and degrade. So I would say that there's a substantial amount of confidence in the scientific fields now that these are the things that really underlie how and why we age.
And you told me, I mean, and I read that there are a lot of scientists and a lot of scientific work that has been done on anti-aging, but that has not necessarily been translated into drugs or tried to be translated. Like how big is that like base of knowledge?
Sure. So yeah, what I was in our previous conversation, what we had talked about before is that until I would say a couple years ago, you talked about kind of the hype of longevity and the hype of the anti-aging movement. Before that hype started taking hold in a way, and before I would say we arrived at these more concrete definitions of the things that were playing a role in the biology of aging, if you were studying in worms or fruit flies or mice the things that make us age and measuring the lifespan of those animals in the laboratory, when you created a gene modification or something like that that caused your mouse to live longer, you didn't immediately think, oh, let's go start a biotech company around this. Usually what people were thinking were, oh, well, let's try making 2 modifications, or let's try making a better modification and increase that growth in lifespan from 10% to 15% or something like that, right? And so you had this scientific cycle that was building, but if you took the same situation in a cancer lab and you said, oh, well, we killed 90% of cancer cells, the response of that lab wouldn't be, oh, well, let's go back and redesign the drug. Maybe it would be that in part, but they would also think, well, let's talk about getting this into patients and starting a company around this or licensing it out or something like that. And so this body of work in what we call the geroscience space, right? Or the anti-aging space, but I think geroscience is the more accepted term there, is at least 80 mutations or chemicals in mice that have been shown with some level of conviction to extend the healthy lifespan of a mouse, either by extending the maximum or median or overall health or what have you. There are a few different ways to measure it. And then that number increases dramatically up above 400 different modifications as you include mice and worms.
All right. And that's very interesting. And I guess, I mean, you're talking a lot about animal studies. I guess then the big challenge is like, how do you go into humans?
Yeah. So of course, sorry, go ahead.
I guess when you're trying to prevent a disease, it's very tricky to, I mean, it's tricky at least to measure, to just measure the endpoints and then to design the study. How is it in theory? And then second part of my question will be like, who is actually doing human trial right now on anti-aging drugs?
Yep, that's a great way of putting it. So let's talk first about the theory and then talk about what we're doing at Apollo and like why we think there's actually room to take the biology of aging. Sorry for the ambulance outside. Room to take the biology of aging and actually start companies around it today and bring it into the clinic.
Yeah.
So, which are like 2 paths that I see as running in parallel. On the first path, we have a set of generic drugs that have been tested in mice and can extend the healthy lifespan of mice. One of these is rapamycin, which I think is probably the most famous one, which extends the lifespan of mice by 15 to 20% or something like this. It's been used in humans for a long time, but it has some side effects. Like it's actually used, was originally developed as an immunosuppressant. And the other one that I think is getting a lot of notoriety right now is metformin, which is a type 2 diabetes drug that a group of scientists really led by Nir Barzilai from Albert Einstein Institute in New York has put together a clinical trial and is doing one of these really tough preventative clinical trials that's going to last 7 years of following people in order to measure whether giving them metformin before they get sick can help them delay the onset of the diseases, the chronic diseases of aging, like cancer and dementia and heart disease. So in order, like this model of a 7-year clinical trial though, like that's not really something that can be easily translated to a commercial model with a patented drug. Like metformin is a generic, it's cheap, it's been around forever. There aren't very many companies. There are some that are doing, like Eli Lilly's Alzheimer's trial is like a similar scope, which is why I think that.
And it's working really well.
Yeah, well, not that one. Yeah, there are some, but like there are some other trials, right? There are multiple Alzheimer's trials that are going, better and are taking this really long view of even trying to intervene at a very early stage of Alzheimer's disease. And
so what's the other part of the trial instead of doing a 7 years?
So with those, I think that the thing that's going to have to come out of those in the next 5 to 10 years, as we look at those trials, are biomarkers that will give us a hint of whether or not the trial is working to reduce the risk of the diseases of aging, and then that biomarker could be used in future trials. This is basically the way that cholesterol was developed as a biomarker, and we have drugs like Crestor and Lipitor now that target cholesterol. In the early days, you had to test whether cholesterol reduction could actually reduce the risks of strokes and heart attacks, and those were long and hard studies. But now you can actually do something a little bit quicker and on more commercial timelines by just saying, hey, look, our drug is reducing cholesterol. And you have to measure a bunch of other things first, but it becomes more commercial windows. The second path that I want to mention, and this is the stuff that Apollo is getting involved in, it's built from the basic science of geroscience or aging biology, just like the metformin and rapamycin stuff. But as we advance things that are coming out of our portfolio companies to the clinic, our vision isn't for those to go straight for prevention trials. The vision here is that similar to Unity's approach, you mentioned the anti-senescent cell company, they want to go after geriatric syndromes like osteoarthritis, things that go wrong with our bodies as we get older, but they are really treatable medical conditions. And so even though eliminating our senescent cells, if we were a mouse, might extend our lifespan and help us with our kidney function and our bone function and a dozen other things, you be really focused on one indication that's a real clinical opportunity and move that towards the clinic just like you would a traditional oncology drug or a traditional osteoarthritis drug.
Yeah.
And that's the opportunity that Apollo is really excited about. And then, of course, there's this vision in the longer term that those two currently independent paths of making all these new drugs, on one hand, based on the state-of-the-art science and the biomarkers and clinical trial experience generated from these generics, that will come together and create a world where we can actually do preventative clinical trials for these new medicines that are going to emerge over the next 5 years to 10 years. And like, yeah, that's the healthcare world I'm really, really excited about.
If I summarize, it's basic. If I summarize the 10 minutes, basic taking these 9 categories, finding good markers out of or good targets out of it, and then treat them. I mean, and then finding the effects on treatable disease for now, and then on the second step, going for the real prevention, like expecting lifespan.
Exactly. I think that's a good summary.
Yeah. Great. And so based on that summary, like who is buying into that vision?
Oh, okay, yeah. So this was the other piece that we wanted to get to. So I wanted to make like a couple of points on this, because as you said, there has been like a lot of news coverage in like Time Magazine, The Economist, New York Times, TechCrunch, like all of these mainstream media outlets are getting excited about the science of aging in a way that they never really seem to get excited about traditional pharmaceuticals.
Yeah.
Even though, as we just discussed, I think that traditional pharmaceuticals are going to be really much, the stuff that's going to come out of aging biology is going to look a lot more like traditional pharmaceuticals for the next 10 years. The big different players that are coming into this, because as you mentioned, certainly you have some traditional biotech players that are playing a role here. Arch Ventures has done a lot of great things before they started Unity. There's a rapamycin analog company. Well, it's not rapalogs, but they're doing targeting of mTOR, which is the pathway that rapamycin targets. But Atlas Venture and a whole bunch of other big name East Coast venture firms have created Navitor. And so there are a few companies in this space that are kind of built off of the science of aging, certainly that lend a bit of respectability to it. But then you also have these new entrants, which are the technology players. You're Jeff Bezos, Google creating Calico as a partnership with AbbVie for $1.5 billion almost. And I think that this comes.
We don't know anything about because they don't communicate anything.
That's right. There's been those articles that they haven't been super communicative. Although we know a couple things about the partnerships that they've had, right? Yeah. Like they acquired some technology from UT Southwestern on NAD derivatives, and they had a partnership with Ancestry DNA. So there are like a few things that we know.
They have Art Levinson as CEO, as a former CEO of Genentech, I guess.
Yeah.
Some good management on board.
But I think that there are two things driving this shift. And the first one actually has very little to do with bio and pharma, which is that the internet space has attracted so much investment, and the return profiles of investment in this space actually look much worse compared to biopharma in both the US and the EU. So if you're a tech investor, many people that I've talked to in the Bay Area, but also like around the world, are looking at the return profiles of different types of investment, and the biopharma space is actually just kicking ass right now.
In terms of really pure return investment, also about timeframes, like timelines.
So the timeframes are actually not so different. So from the point of VC investment to exit, there was a recent analysis in the US that biopharma investments tend to be just barely less, but almost equivalent. And I think that the biggest one is in terms of IRRs. So by IRRs over the last, which is internal rate of return in VC speak. So the IRRs of biotech investments have been on average almost double what tech investing has been over the last 4 years. And so when you see numbers like that and you're a tech investor, it makes sense to make some moves. I think that this is also fueled a little bit by the big acquisition of Stemcentrx, which by AbbVie, right, which was $12 billion, and it was backed almost solely by Founders Fund in like round after round after round, and with Founders Fund, who has always actually been interested in biology, but had never really had a huge exit in the space, for them to really have taken the lead on that and generate this huge exit. I think that we're seeing a lot of other players take that as an okay to follow suit. The second thing, as you mentioned before, is just you take a world of people who are interested in creating the reality that they want to see in the world, which is like the tech Silicon Valley universe, and you dangle this idea of living longer and health through pharmaceuticals and doing more than just wearing your Fitbit and drinking your kale shakes. And I think that that's a really powerful idea that speaks to a lot of people. And it's just an idea with the same sort of world-changing power and excitement that is kind of iconic of the Silicon Valley ethos. And so I think that that's why there's some additional momentum behind it.
And how is it from the buyer side, from the big pharma side? I mean, I talked to a few, and they were very debitative. Like, especially in Europe, they were like, "What are we talking about?" Like,
exactly, because as we talked about before, I think that from the perspective of a VC like me, like I can opine a little bit more on the basic biology of aging and whatnot. But by the time you talk about the buyer's level, like acquisitions of these companies, what you really want to be talking about is how can this medicine be used for this specific indication, right? And you build up a value proposition much more about how it's useful for early stage Alzheimer's or osteoporosis or the senility or whatever else it is that you're doing the clinical trials for. That's where the proof of the pudding comes, not from this grand vision of preventing disease and living longer and aging, which is why I think it's probably tough to talk about at this stage of the game with potential acquirers, because like taking something like Unity, for example, that has taken a lot of money in. If you say, okay, how much will this drug be worth if you can kill senescent cells? We won't really know until we start seeing whether there's an effect of killing senescent cells in humans.
Yeah. And maybe just a quick comment on the Unity and Navigator you call. How advanced are you? How advanced is the clinical trials in anti-aging now?
So yeah, I would say these are probably the two leading biotech companies that are advancing things to the clinic. Both of them are in late preclinical phases.
Okay.
So we haven't seen anything in the clinic from these two. Although if you wanted to be even a little bit wider in your definition, then before Navitor working on mTOR inhibitors, like Novartis has spent a lot of time working on mTOR inhibitors and has this drug everolimus, which is a follow-up to rapamycin that has been on the market for years. And so, yeah, I think that there's been a little bit of activity in the space, and certainly Certris, which was acquired by GSK, they still have a couple things hanging around in clinical trials that are working on sirtuins. But I think that the real meat of this space is going to enter clinical trials in the next 2 years.
All right. Let's see if it's true. And so I guess as a summary, I mean, I guess you have all these targets, potential targets. You don't have yet anything in humans, and you are investing in the space. Like, so what are you specifically looking for when you look at a deal?
Yeah, so I would say that the aging thing that we do here at Apollo is more of an inclusion criteria. Like if you're working on the basic biology of aging, then we'll look at the company. And that's kind of a way that we allow ourselves to be global in our scope, that we can look at things in Europe, things in the US, but still actually know everybody and talk to everybody in the space. Once we see the deal, whether it's the science or whatever, it really becomes a much more commercial matter, right? Like, is this drug going to be effective for an indication that we can build a biotechnology company around using the rules that currently exist for biotechnology companies? We don't want to build something completely unheard of and then throw it into the EMEA or FDA and say, I hope that this works out. That's not a good investment strategy.
Or you would need Dietmar Hopp or Bill Gates to put some 100 millions in it, like
something like that, multiple hundreds, yeah.
And so far, because you closed the fund very recently, can you tell a bit more on how you are standing right now?
Yeah. So Apollo isn't raising money anymore. We're currently active and will be doing seed investments or actually helping scientists start companies in this space over the next 2 years, and we'll be making a series of investments in early stage things. As we were just talking about, almost all of the stuff in this space is preclinical, and some of it is very advanced but still in universities. So we're helping scientists actually think about how to be entrepreneurs who have never thought of themselves as potential entrepreneurs in 20 years in this space, for example. So I think this is where the big opportunity in this space is right now. It doesn't, I mean, with maybe certain exceptions, it's not ready for the $500 million fund just focused on aging. We need to get a couple of wins who can generate some really good lead candidates, attract in some outside investment from leading players, and advance these things towards the clinic in a rational, stepwise manner.
That's great. Yeah, makes super sense. And I guess I have a bonus question. So you're American, you worked in the Valley, and now you moved to Europe to invest in anti-aging.
Why?
Why is that?
Sure. So it started with a bit of serendipity. The partners that I wanted to start Apollo with happened to be here in Germany, and between them coming to New York, where I was living at the time, versus me coming to Europe, I decided to come to Europe. But there's a second, and I think the bigger reason that I'm really excited to be in Europe generally, and Germany specifically, which is that the science that is here in Europe, specifically the quality of the science versus the people that are around trying to do what Apollo is doing, which is to help them start companies, provide substantial checks for seed funding, and really provide a bit of structure, organization, and funding, there's such a mismatch where the quality of science is so good here in Europe, and the support at these early stages, I think, is lagging way behind the States. So that means that the opportunity to really help create value for a young firm like Apollo is vast in Europe. And even though we have some additional challenges, things are spread out because like not everybody is going to Boston. It also is an enormous opportunity. And so since being in Europe for about a year now, and getting Apollo together, I've become more and more excited about being in Europe and more bullish on the European biotechnology market.
That's great. And great to have you here, in Europe, and great to have you here live. I think the time we are over, and I think we covered really well the different parts of anti-aging. It's really great covering both the science, the clinics, and the investment. I hope you guys who watched this live, you got you got a really good overview on the field. If you have any follow-up questions, feel free to reach out. I see there's a question on if we communicate James info. Yeah, we will. We can send it to the participants. And if you have any follow-up question, there will be an article posted with a video. Feel free to comment on the website. And see you on Labiotech. Thanks, James, again.
Hey, this is super fun, Philip. Thanks for having me.
Clap for you. Thanks. Have a nice day.
All right. Ciao.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.